Too busy to read. Are you too busy for success? Today on the Daily Ish Show.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, ignition, liftoff.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Daily Ish Show. A show not just for rental housing providers, but for any business owners, or really anybody who is looking to be more time wealthy and have more white space in their calendar. Welcome. My name is Mark Dolfini, your host. It's really good to see you. Today's topic is, are you too busy to read? Well, are you too busy for success? Seems maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm sounding a little judgy here. I've been down that road, so it's interesting. I hear this all the time about about people who are, especially busy people, and I hear this a lot from people who are parents and running from hither and yon, chasing their kids down and getting them to soccer practice and baseball games and trying to do a vacation here and there. And they're just too busy to read, too busy to sharpen the saw. And trust me, I was one of the loudest people, especially after I got out of college. I was like, there is no way I'm ever going to touch another book again. I was so done just reading because I had spent the better part of 4 years not just going through the motions in college to get good grades, but I was there to educate myself, and that was a little bit different. I was there for to learn as much as I could about the field of accounting and finance, and if there was a topic that I would read about in a particular book, I would actually go off on a tangent and learn as much as I could about that particular topic. So I wasn't just in the university to check the boxes. I was actually in college to learn as much as I possibly could. So after I got done, and I was working 2 part-time jobs, plus I had some rental properties on the side, and I was burnt out. I was totally toasted. So by the time I got off of the, got out of the graduate, or after commencement, I tell people I flirted with the idea of graduate school for about a good solid 5-6 seconds, and then you could hear my tires squealing out of the parking lot getting out of there. And it was just interesting because when I had, I was just done. I was really, really tired from all the work that I had done for the previous 4 years. Nothing wrong with that, but I was a little foolish and a little short-sighted to say I was never going to read another book again. In fact, I did say that to myself, and it really was. It was really myopic in terms of my own growth and things that I had to do. And it wasn't until maybe, let's see now, I had been out of work. Well, I had left the corporate world back in 2001. And it was probably not until about 2004, maybe 2005, that I picked up another book again. And there was books that I always had laying around. I mean, I had been a reader before, but I just wasn't really interested in it. And I got into this kind of a small mastermind group. I don't really know how else to call it, but it was a small mastermind group of just 4 or 5 of us. And we would talk about different topics and this and that. And it was interesting because I had heard about the book called the EMyth. And actually my original book is up there. And it's really cool because that was one of the first books I was introduced to when I was in the business world. And I didn't know anything about the EMyth. It was the entrepreneurial myth written by Michael Gerber. And it's really cool because Michael Gerber and I are actually connected on Facebook now. We don't hang out and don't want to name drop here, but it's just really cool because he was one of the first books I was introduced to. However, it was not the first book that I read after college. One of the first books I actually read after college was this book, The Ultimate Sales Machine by Chet Holmes. Now, it was I remember hearing this book. I had satellite radio in my truck, and I would drive back and forth from St. Louis. I was getting ready to leave the Marriott, and I had heard of this book many times on satellite radio. And it was The Ultimate Sales Machine by Chet Holmes. And Chet Holmes was a really solid sales guy. Unfortunately, he passed away way too young. I think he passed away several years ago. He was in his 40s. But he, it was a fantastic book. And it was one of the first books I ever read and after college. In fact, I believe this was my first book that I read after school. I didn't read the E-Myth until a few years, a few books later. I can't say it was a few years later, but it was one of those books where I opened it up and it kind of grabbed me right away, just because there was a few things in there that I could relate to, especially as a martial artist. I think Chet Holmes was a martial artist as well. So there's a couple things that kind of grabbed me right away. But it was really cool because it started talking about systematizing certain things that need to be done in the business. Now, remember, I've been talking about the VIP method, the Vision Infrastructure Process method, for many of these programs. And of course, in the 4 basic functions that every business has to have, obviously the lead generation, the sales piece, the operational function, and then of course the accounting piece, right? Well, each one of those functions there has to be some sort of not automation, but there has to be some sort of system for each one of those things. There has to be a system for the lead generation. There has to be a system for the sales. There has to be a system for the operational function. There has to be a system for accounting. Because if you don't have a system for each one of these things, they're just going to fly off the wheel. So in terms of the Ultimate Sales Machine, that was the first book. And it was interesting because if you can see on the book, there's actually little gears, right? It actually talks about a sales machine in terms of how to generate sales, how to generate leads, and it was a really well done book. It was especially for one of the first books that I read after college, because all those books were just strictly academic and many of them were theoretical. So that was the first time. So it's really interesting. I hear all the time that I don't have the time to read. What would I read? What difference would it make? That sort of thing. The point is, that book started me down a road of learning how to put procedures and systems in place for my business. And it ultimately led to where I wrote this book probably about 15 years later. So if I had never read that book, I never would have wrote that book, which is really interesting if you think about it. And all the things that had happened and transpired, had I maybe done it a little bit sooner, I wouldn't have had to go through all the sucky things I had to go through. I don't begrudge them. Those things were trials that definitely made me a better person and made me who I am now. And now I get to coach people to help them avoid that suckiness, right? And help keep them out of the same traps that I fell into. But it's really interesting. You're saying you don't have the time to read. Here's an interesting statistic, and actually somewhat sad, is that the average American watches over 4 hours of television every day, every single day. If you add that all up, that's about 2 solid months of television time every year, every single year. So if you just carved out, I'm not saying eliminate television entirely. I'm not one of those curmudgeons. There's shows that I actually watch, and my father-in-law and I have been desperately waiting for the return of Yellowstone. So come on, man. If someone's out there listening, please bring back Yellowstone. But if you just cut out 1 hour per day to better yourself, just think of, this just 1 hour, maybe prior to going to bed or whatever, just 1 hour a day where you could devote to bettering yourself, to learning another skill. It was interesting that, you think, and again, I hear it all the time, well, when I read, I fall asleep, or when I read, my mind wanders. Mine did too, especially when I first started. But the mind that I have learned, it's just like a muscle. It can be trained to focus. It can be trained not to sit and wander. And especially if you're reading a book, you're like, well, reading is boring. Okay, well, maybe some of the books you're reading are boring. But there's certainly some books that I have to slug through just to get through them, because they were just not, they were snooze fests. But the information down the road eventually was worth it. Some books just aren't. But when I was wanting to learn a certain thing or whatever it was, that's when I would really say, okay, do I really want to learn this? Do I see where this is going? Is this really important for me that I want to learn? I kind of felt that way about the 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss. Man, the first 3 chapters of that book were terrible. I couldn't hardly get through it because it was just how much Tim Ferriss loved himself. However, Tim Ferriss had some really, really good points, and I'm glad I got through those first 3 chapters, because it was, the rest of the book was really, really good. It was gold. And lots of people were reading. I actually listened to it on Audible. I almost shut it off on Audible. And that's how that was. How bad I thought it was. But it became one of my favorite books. And again, I modeled some of that book off of from the Time Wealthy Investor 2.0. So it's just really interesting that, if you're not going to take that time, or you're too busy for success, there's so many people who are very, very highly successful people who read an awful lot. And they don't just read, but they study. You're looking at the billionaires of all those people who read and continue to educate themselves and to continue to get better. And they're continuing to take courses, and they're continuing to take classes, and they're continuing to go to other people's seminars. You're looking at the people like Jack Canfield and even Ivan Meisner and Bill Gates and all these people who are continuing on to much, much bigger and better things because they continue to sharpen the saw. So, it was interesting that, like one of the books that I read, that it's a book I reference all the time, but Unlimited Power, right? This is a really good book. And it's also like, I swear to God, Tony Robbins does not write short books. I think this is the shortest book he wrote, and it's just over 400 pages. It's like a 420 page book. Jack Canfield wrote The Success Principles, fantastic book. If you've never read it, I would highly suggest it. That's like 570 pages. I mean, some of these are just absolute tomes, and you're thinking, holy crap, how am I going to get through all these? Well, you get through it one page at a time, one chapter at a time, 1 hour at a time. That's basically chapter by chapter, one book at a time. That's how you get through them. And eventually, when you start getting through, what the real payoff is when you get a real nugget that's like, man, that's really good. That's one that you tab. That's one that you dog ear and you highlight and underline and go, man, I really need to incorporate that into my life because it's so good. And I just think about this for a second. I hear about, like I talked about audio books and that sort of thing. That, if that's how you learn, if you're an audio or audible learner, then by all means do Audible. If that's the best way for you to get, to absorb it, it is not for me. For me, I'm a very visual learner and I'm a very kinesthetic learner. I'm probably more kinesthetic than anything. I have to write it and then kind of rewrite it in the margins for me to absorb it. That's what I have to do in terms of learning. That's why a Kindle is not really the best for me. I don't really like Kindles, and people are like, well, you can make notes and stuff like that. I'm like, yeah, it's not the same though. It's not the same experience for me. So whatever experience it is for you, if it's Kindle because you're a visual learner, or if you're a kinesthetic learner, you actually need a physical book, or you're an audible learner, recognize what you are. But just one final thought, and we're going to wrap this up. Whatever it is that you're willing, if you're willing to do it, and chances are, and it's hard, and if it's difficult, yeah, it's hard to get through some of these 500 plus page books. Like right now, I'm reading the Bible from front to back. And the Bible, this particular Bible that I have, is over 1,800 pages. Now, my goal was to read it by the end of this year. So I started back in October of last year, and I should wrap up sometime by October of this year. And I'm reading it roughly 5 pages at a time. So right now, I'm at 1,140. I think I just got done with Lamentations. So I, through the book of Lamentations, I'm getting into Ezekiel. So I'm almost through the Old Testament, but I did that 5 pages at a time. And even though Lamentations, I don't think I'm saying that right. Lamentations? I think I'm saying it right. Anyway, so as I'm getting through Lamentations, it was like not really a long book. And I'm thinking, I got through that actually pretty quickly. It was actually 2 pages because I just came out of Isaiah, which is really long, and then Jeremiah, which is really long. And I was thinking, holy crap, this is going to take me forever to get through these books. It felt like I was never going to get out of them. But again, page by page, 5 pages at a time, that's what I was doing. And as on that same path, I'm going to be done with that, with the entire Bible by the end of October, because it's important to me, because my spiritual growth is important to me, because my learning is important to me. That's why I read these other books, and I do that every single day. So hopefully this gives you some motivation to sharpen the saw. We all deserve to have better than where we're at, and hopefully that will help motivate you to do that. So if you'd like to join the discussion, the Time Wealthy VIP Lounge, you can go to the group page. I went ahead and put that in the show notes. You can go ahead and join us there. We talk about all sorts of business stuff, not necessarily landlording or real estate stuff, but if you have a small business or any business and you'd like to be more time wealthy, that is something that we would love to have you join the discussion. So hopefully we'll see you then. All right, well, that is all I have for today. Please be sure to place a value on your free time. Because if you don't, someone else will. Most important, though, there is no amount of money that will make time irrelevant. Have a great day. See you guys next time.